So through the support of Food for Peace and TOPS, these 4 graduate students traveled to Liberia. Was it in April? March. And spent almost 2 weeks doing this project, which, as you can see, is in food modalities in response to Ebola, a review of beneficiary perceptions in Liberia. So TOPS has been interested in exploring a more comprehensive relationship with an academic institution or more to reinforce the work that we do generally with the PVO community and Food for Peace. And although we hadn't explicitly sought out this particular relationship, this is the one that came together about 6 months ago, as I say. And so we were very pleased to be able to support these 4 students in their work, and look forward to hearing more about their presentation. Can I be heard online? Is it working okay? Okay, great. So without further ado, I'll introduce the team. Nita Malik, Meg Gable, and Shu Fan. Aisata Traore couldn't be here this afternoon, so these 3 will provide their presentation, and I hope there'll be time for question and answer afterwards. So take it away.
Hi everyone, like I said, my name is Meg Gable, and we are here today to present our presentation on food modalities in response to Ebola, a review of beneficiary perceptions in Liberia. But first, we would like to go.
Okay, so anyway, online we have about 15 participants.
Great.
And they work in a variety of different modalities. About 25% of them work with all different types of modalities, and about half work with cash. So I think that this is very appropriate to them. And they're looking to understand the research that you did and also see further lines of questioning that could deepen the understanding from this survey.
Great. Thanks for the full question. Great, thank you. All right, so we'll get started. First, a little roadmap of where we'll be going today with this presentation. We'll be doing an introduction and background first, kind of go over our objectives and methods, modalities in the second part, and then the third part we'll really dive into the crux of our interviews and beneficiary perceptions and kind of what we gained and gleaned from our research. So introduction and background. First, we'd like to especially thank our clients at USAID Food for Peace. They have been working with us since November, and honestly, without the support of their staff, we would not have been able to make this project possible. Equally so, we would like to thank TOPS, who helped support our project financially, and again, really helped us with the logistics of trying to get out into the field. And we'd also like to go ahead and thank both the Washington, D.C. and the staff in Monrovia of our implementing partners at Save the Children, PCI Global, Mercy Corps, and ACDI Avoca. Again, thank you so much for your support. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background about Ebola in Liberia. This map actually was at the height of Ebola in September 2014. The hardest hit areas in West Africa were Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. And worldwide, of the Ebola deaths that actually happened, 43% of those happened in Liberia. At this point, there were 3,280 cases and 1,677 deaths, and that rose to about 4,000 deaths as of April 2016. But one of the leading reasons why Liberia was so hard hit is because the health systems there were already pretty underdeveloped. There was about 50 doctors for about 4.4 million people. So, moving on. Ebola in Liberia. Liberia is classified as a least developed nation. It is ranked 177 out of 188 in the UNDP's 2015 Human Index. 2% of the households were already severely food insecure, with 18% of those households using food coping mechanisms for basic food needs. So some of the market challenges that were created during Ebola were basically barriers to trade and commerce. Throughout Liberia, economic activity was severely disrupted. Food imports by their single port in Monrovia basically dwindled, with fewer and fewer shipping lanes at the height of Ebola, and it went on. And markets were severely affected, with food prices basically ranting and higher throughout the country. Usually in most of the villages that we interviewed, prices had doubled on basic necessities such as rice and grain. Next. So part 2, objectives, methodologies, and programs. This is Food for Peace, which is, again, our primary client. They had already been on the ground in Liberia with food programs. As you can see, throughout 2011, 2012, 2013, there was quite a bit of food already going into the country, but since they already had these programs on the ground, they were immediately able to respond to Ebola in Liberia, and so they tripled the amount of U.S. dollars going in and quadrupled the amount of metric tons of food assistance in Liberia. So the types of modalities. The types of modalities that we assessed in Liberia were food in kind, agricultural vouchers, and cash, or unconditional cash and mobile money. And from this point on, the majority of the pictures that are used in the presentation were those that we took in the field. Our implementing partners were Save the Children. Save the Children did unconditional cash transfer and mobile money, and we primarily interviewed beneficiaries in Marquis County. Mercy Corps was our second partner, cash and agricultural vouchers in Montserrado County. CCI Global, cash and ag vouchers, again in Bowman County, and ACDI Boga, cash, mobile money, and ag vouchers. Throughout every interview, we were also able to assess WFP's food in kind, where they provided at the height of Ebola, usually during the times when villagers are quarantined. Next, objectives and methodologies. So our objectives and methodologies were we went into villages, and we basically interviewed 4 households a day, and we wanted to determine how men and women perceive food modalities differently and identify perceptions of modalities on consumption, food preference, gender dynamics, and protection. We were originally going to do this through focus groups and just one-on-one interviews, but the more that we got down into the questions that we really wanted to ask, we realized that we needed to do household interviews, and so that they could kind of remain open and the beneficiaries would be more open in their responses. At the end of the interviews, we also did separate interviews for male and female heads of households to kind of get the gender dynamics as far as who was making what decisions on purchases and consumption. Next, the third part, beneficiary perceptions by modality. Then this is actually you. Thank you. Before we elaborate on beneficiary perceptions and modalities, here is some demographic data. Of the 64 households we interviewed, the number at the bottom means the number of people that had phones. The average household is 6 people with a minimum 1 and maximum 15. The average interviewee was 44 years old, with the youngest being 19 and the oldest being 80. The first modality is food in kind. Food aid was distributed during Ebola and towards the end of the crisis. Many of the people who received assistance, such as cash or voucher, also received the food. The food provided was generally rice, oil, beans, and cornmeal. Although it could vary slightly depending on the region, overall people were quite pleased with the food provided by WFP. And the food was more nutritious than what they usually eat. As for the definition of nutritious, we asked beneficiaries in our interviews, what did you used to eat before the assistance, and what did you eat after the assistance? If they included any explanation related to protein or greens, such as cassava greens, we noticed that their consumption of nutritious food increased. If they state that they purchased the exact same types of food, then we marked them as remaining the same. The food people needed the most is rice. Almost every respondent in our interviews mentioned rice as their most urgent food need during Ebola. Most people recognized that food was not local, but they did not have any issues with that because normally up to 80% of the food is imported in that area. Food lasts anywhere from 10 days to 6 weeks, depending on the household size, frequency of consumption, and other sources of food, etc. People almost never shared their cash assistance, but did share food outside the family, in many cases with neighbors and families who did not have any assistance before. They were a lot more likely to share cooked food than uncooked food. The second one is agricultural vouchers. Implementing partners provided vouchers to farmers which they redeem either at agricultural fairs or at the locations of agricultural vendors. The purpose is to meet farmers' needs at the start of the planting season. Vouchers were generally given once, sometimes twice. For example, PPI Global distributed $50 amount of vouchers, and the recipients got 30 to spend on tools and 20 on seed. Beneficiaries got resources needed to plant, but they also need support throughout the season, such as fertilizer and insecticides. Beneficiaries in ACDF Vouchers communities pooled resources and knowledge on vouchers with others in the form of community funds. They tend to realize greater gains. However, the communal funds are an exception in this type of programs, because ACDF Voucher had previously established a development program on the ground, and that is why this was so successful. An emergent feeding program would not be able to have these results with that established history. Some people tend to grow crops they're familiar with, while others tend to grow cash crops that would have higher returns. Seeds from the market grow better than seeds from vendors. This varies a bit depending on the community. 60% of beneficiaries who, when asked, would not buy seeds from the vendors again, but would prefer to buy from the market. Of those who has negative perceptions, 70% of them said it was because of the quality of the seeds. There are always speculations on why the seeds field includes the sun was too strong, seeds were not local to the soil, seeds were expired, and vendors mixed the bad seeds with good seeds. Beneficiaries' reactions towards the agricultural tools were more positive than seeds. They mentioned that there were things they needed but are not on the list. These things include rain boots, raincoat, and wheelbarrow. Nina. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So we asked a few questions related to instructions and trying to see if anyone outside the household was influencing how the assistance was going to be spent. So eventually we started asking specifically, did the distributor tell you anything when they give you the cash assistance? And we heard varied answers ranging from, no, they didn't say anything, or we were told to use the money for food and to invest in a good tomorrow. But sometimes we heard some people say they were told by the distributor, the money is just for food, it should not be used for clothes or for anything else. And so while the vast majority of the beneficiaries spent their money on a variety of categories, there were a few who spent their assistance on almost exclusively food. And often those were the same ones that said they had received specific instructions that they were not allowed to spend the money on anything else. Despite that the beneficiaries had expressed to us that I had wanted to purchase other things, but I felt that I wasn't able to because maybe it would affect my participation in the program in the future. So that was something very interesting we found, and we only started realizing it later, and that's something that we would recommend other programs to look into potentially in the future. So this is a really simple graph, kind of just depicting visually some of the things that we asked. We would ask these questions, what did you used to do before the assistance, and what did you do after the assistance? And so this is all related to the cash, the unconditional cash transfer, as well as mobile money. So the majority of our respondents, as you can see in graph number 1, started to purchase larger quantities of food, about 80%. In regards to the type of food purchased, only 30% stated that they increased purchasing of nutritious food. In regards to the last graph, in daily consumption, about 50% stated that they increased the number of times in which they ate per day. But what was really interesting was about 15 people said that they decreased the number of times they ate today. We found that odd because they were given assistance that was supposed to help purchase food. And so we'll talk a bit about that in the next one. So those that explained that they started increasing the amount of food they bought, they explained that usually they would purchase rice by the cups. But after receiving the cash, they would purchase a half bag of rice, so about 25 kilograms. Everyone said they preferred to purchase rice by the bag because not only was it cheaper, but it allowed them to plan their consumption better. Another example we heard of was people buying dried fish instead of fresh fish because dried fish would last longer. Those that continued to purchase the same amount said they did so because the money was not enough, or they decided to spend their money on other things, and also because they wanted the money to last longer. For those that started eating less, the 15% that said that they decreased their consumption. So we talked to many people that ate once per day, but a lot of them ate twice per day. And those were generally the ones that decreased. And occasionally people eating 3 times a day started eating twice. So sometimes the explanation was a very unique explanation that more family members moved in with me during Ebola. But generally what we were seeing was those that decreased their consumption, their daily consumption, was because they wanted to invest the money in the business. They tended to be very business-oriented and had either started a micro-enterprise or wanted to grow theirs. One of our interviewees expressed it very frankly when she said, I know the money will stop coming one day, but I want to make the money last, so I'm going to use it in a way that will help me do that. So we started to see some instances of the cash infusion allowing people to plan long-term. So this is a graph in which we depicted the beneficiary spending, and so there's different categories in which people spent their money. As you can see, food is the largest category, which hopefully is a good thing. But then secondly, business investments as well as farm investments and school-related fees are a close second. I'll talk a bit more about those two on the next slide. But as you can see, health and clothes were a major priority, and clothes because if a person came into contact with an Ebola-affected survivor or not survivor, they were instructed to burn all of their clothes. So a lot of people were starting from scratch in regards to that. Health is interesting because supposedly in Liberia, if you had someone affected by Ebola, treatment was supposed to be free. We found that some people expressed that wasn't always the case. But health also includes people wanting to save money in case there was another emergency, or if they had small children and something not related to Ebola, wanting to spend money on food or medicine, as well as if you had elderly folks in your household. So I told you I'd talk a bit more about the business investments and the school-related fees. What we saw was some short-term planning and then some long-term planning. So sometimes people would purchase rice from the market or candy, alcohol, diapers, and then resell it in their village. We saw an example of long-term planning. For example, one woman bought palm oil and was waiting until the rainy season to resell it because she recognized the price would increase. Some people use their cash to upgrade themselves in the value chain. So if they used to do something with coal, they would purchase a stick that would allow them to do it with charcoal. And they used to collect palm nuts. They would now process the palm nuts into palm oil. And so we heard that a number of times, which is very interesting to see. School-related fees varied greatly from village to village, and also it depended on how many children you had in your home that you were trying to send to school. We also saw the number of fees varying greatly. Some people had to pay the principal, and they had to pay this administrator, and they had to pay this fee, and so that could cause the price of the school fees to take a large portion of their distribution. So this is an example of beneficiary spending. So we want to be clear that it's just one individual case, and each individual is very different, but it gives you an idea of how the cash and the spending differed based on disbursement. And so disbursements were given about often 4,500 Liberian dollars, which translates to roughly $50 US, and each partner was slightly different, but that was about the same across the board. In the first disbursement, the blue is related to food, and that was common. We saw people spending a large chunk of their first cash distribution on food, and then this individual spent the rest on clothes. The second disbursement is all into their business, and so we saw that common by the second and third distribution. People started thinking about their business. Generally, we saw more also went to food in the second disbursement. This individual, that was not the case. And then by the third disbursement, people started thinking about their shelter. I wanted to create a roof to prevent the rains from coming in. We talked to one woman, it was very interesting. She built the roof for herself and then decided she wanted to house chickens in there. They would grow eggs and she could resell that. And so she continued living, without her roof. So we did see the number, the amount of money being spent on food decrease. This one did it a bit more drastically. But I have another example which will explain it a little bit more. And disbursements were giving, some programs were giving it 3 times and others were giving it 6 times. By the time we spoke with beneficiaries, they were about halfway through the program or about If they were receiving 6 distributions, we talked to them around the 3rd one. If they were receiving 3 distributions, we talked to them around the 2nd distribution. So another example, this individual spent not that much on food in their first disbursement, but a vast majority in the red going to school. It might be a little hard to see, but this section is savings. And so people explain savings were often health-related, but for anything else, for their business as well. Second disbursement, they increased the amount that they spent on food. The middle section, again, is savings, and then they started thinking about business. That was very normal for us to see about a second and third investment, that business became, or microenterprises became a very large priority for people. Mobile money. Mobile money has a lot of challenges in Liberia, and we had 2 partners, Save the Children and ACDI Voca, who are piloting these programs. And so we reached out to them, both in the field and afterwards, to get some of their feedback, and we have included some of that to help explain some of the challenges and also the benefits that from their exit interviews with beneficiaries. So the main challenges are low network coverage. And so there's limited reach of mobile phones, and especially when you're in the villages, that becomes even harder. That's the number one problem. We experienced that ourselves, when we were in the villages. Another major issue is the inability of the service provider to meet the obligations. And that could probably be because there's only one mobile provider in the country. There's also a lot of technical issues. So the capacity of the platform is limited, and it's unable to transact large amounts of money at one time. And so there were many cases where the system would just shut down in the middle of a transfer. And so that would have a really negative effect on beneficiaries' perceptions of mobile money. So with poor customer service, there's a coordination gap between Lone Star Cell and MTN mobile money provider. And because of this, often SIM cards would fall invalid during a cash transfer or even after, and then people weren't able to access their money right away. And so all of these are contributing factors into this very negative perception of mobile money. As well, the prevalence of mobile phones is not as common in the villages that we visited in Liberia. Another issue they faced was the registration process was poor, and that can be attributed to the low network availability. And finally, the low capacity of the mobile money agents to be able to handle the high volumes of cash. When speaking to the implementing partners, they were telling us that it was very difficult to find agents that were willing to go into the field and work with this cash transfer. And so often they would go to the distribution site, which was in the village, and they wouldn't know how much money they had available to distribute that day. Because ACDI Voca, what they had to do was they would transfer the money to the phone, and then because of a lot of these challenges, they would send a bank agent 1 week later to be able to cash that out. But they weren't always aware of how much money they would have until that day. So people would wait, beneficiaries would wait all day for their access to their money, and then sometimes it would run out before everyone received it. So this inexperience also that the beneficiaries express that we don't know how to use it. If we take it to the market, we're not sure if the vendor will rip us off. And so also women express that their husband had control over the mobile phone generally, so it would be harder for them to access the money, where the cash, that wasn't always the case. So those are a lot of the challenges. There were some benefits that the beneficiaries cited themselves, that they could understand why it was that they could use this. And so they recognize that it's a safe and secure way to send and receive cash. And in some cases, the beneficiaries were given a phone. So they really liked that. They were able to call different family members and use it for different reasons. So one of my last slides that I'll speak about is household decision-making and safety concerns. So majority of the dual-headed households we interviewed expressed that they made decisions together. Once we separated the husband and the wife, we asked them these questions again, and generally we received the same answer. We don't really disagree. We have the same interests. Occasionally, though, more than occasionally, we did hear women say, my husband makes more of the decisions, and I kind of do have to agree. So we kind of came to the conclusion that perhaps they wouldn't have even told us if they disagreed, because they may not have been that comfortable with us. Another thing we saw was that single mothers were often influenced by older sons as far as they had input in the decision-making in the household. But there didn't seem to be any pressure from outside the household to share the distribution or how to spend the distribution. And we, probed for, is a town chief saying anything? Is a distributor pressuring you? Is a family member outside? And we really didn't see people express concerns in regard to that. Safety concerns, again, we were happy to report that there were not really any incidents of people having their money getting stolen, but single women were likelier to express safety concerns. And again, that's natural. And that includes divorced women, widowed women as well. A way that they mitigated this, particularly they expressed that they were fearful of carrying their cash to and from the market, because they didn't really fear people within their community, but it's the people outside. Someone could come out of the bush and threaten, something we heard many times. And so a way that they mitigated this was by walking in groups. A couple times I asked these individuals, would you prefer mobile money then, because you wouldn't be carrying the cash? And still the answer was, no, I prefer the hard cash. And then, shoot. Thank you.
So the last section is modality preference. This graph shows beneficiaries' preferences on different modalities. We quantified our qualitative data using a software called Deduce, and we weighted higher preference with larger numbers. For example, the weight of people's first preference is 3, and the second is 2, and third is 1. Overall, before Ebola, the households we interviewed prefer money, which means cash or mobile money, because they have various needs to meet. For instance, they can pay for children's school fee and invest in their small business or farm. During Ebola, they would prefer food. And you can see that their degree of preference on food has increased significantly from 32% to 59%. This is because some people were not able to obtain food even if they were given money during Ebola due to the quarantine or fear of large crowd. Some beneficiaries mentioned that we need food to survive first, and then we will have the strength to work. Some beneficiaries said children's school fee was their first priority, but school was not open during Ebola. Some people said they wanted money, still wanted money during Ebola because they need to buy medicine. But this varies with locations due to different health policies in different places in the country. After Ebola, money is still the most preferred because people are going back to their normal life. People's preference on agricultural vouchers has not changed that much. But when we break down the preference by different modalities people receive, we noticed that many beneficiaries who did not receive vouchers would prefer vouchers more than those who did. This is because those people who did not receive vouchers are not farmers, but they expressed interest in doing farming, and they believe that farming will be more profitable to them. When we break down the preference by demographic features, we notice that more food insecure households, these are generally more vulnerable households, single moms with young children and handicapped. They are indifferent to modality preference with a slight leaning towards food. Houses that perceive themselves to be more food secure prefer cash because it allows them to meet other consumption priorities. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was interesting. Let's open it up to questions here first in the room, and then we'll come to online. But online people, you can begin to think about questions and formulate them. But here in the room, any questions from those who are present in Washington? Observations?
How did you assess the security of the household?
Well, we didn't necessarily go and assess the food security of the households just by the fact that these programs were already there. They were understood to be food secure households. And I believe that usually these were identified as being single mothers or individuals who had either already been affected by Ebola personally or had a family member in the household who had unfortunately passed away due to Ebola. So in a way, those were the measurements for assessing food security in the household affected by Ebola.
In addition, sometimes we ask people, did you ever fear that you were not able to get food if you needed it? And if people express, like, that they were, sometimes that also contributed to that explanation.
Okay. Any questions online? Not online either?
No, not right now.
Yes, sorry, we'll go in the back of the room and then we'll come up front.
Back to slides with beneficiaries 1 and 2, where you had the beneficiary layout. Well, this one too, actually. How did you run numbers basically sort of, you had 64 households, right?
Correct.
64 beneficiaries. Did you sort of do that analysis for, not this one, the one with the 2, where you had the bar, the Gantt charts with the 2 different, this one is 1 and 2. Did you guys run an analysis on sort of the overall trends among all 64 based on disbursements? Because, for example, if someone got 2, what happened to the third disbursement?
The third one hadn't arrived yet.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I was saying we kind of talked, we're still in the middle of the program.
Okay.
It's something that we wanted to do, but we didn't think to ask specifically how much money we're being asked until later. And you know how one of the biggest learning experiences we had was how questions changed in the field and how things that some of the questions we had previously were like, this is getting no answers, no one is saying this. So it's something that we did come to later, which is why we didn't feel comfortable kind of putting a number on that wider data because we didn't think it was good enough versus having a couple sample cases to present that way. So unfortunately, we don't have a solid number to tell you. But we think it's really interesting, and people have expressed it's really interesting to see how it differs.
Yeah, I'm sure imagining also getting an exact cash receipt like that's something that.
Right. Sometimes we cannot even remember how to spend the money. And when we ask them, they say, I spent all my money on food. Because they're afraid people would take their names off the list.
So it takes a lot of pushing to even find out, like, you didn't spend it on clothes. Oh, yeah, I bought clothes 4 months ago. It's stuff I don't remember what I bought 2 days ago sometimes.
In this particular case, we had the saving program in their community, so they save $1,000 Liberian dollar every month. That's the light blue.
So I had a question similar to that. So in the very beginning, you mentioned that folks were saying they were told they had to purchase food, and so I find this interesting. Then, do you think this is because you built some rapport and trust that they sort of deviated from the initial message they gave, which is I was told to spend it on food, so I spent it on food? And then I was also wondering if each disbursement was, so at this point maybe the program had been going on, 12 weeks, if you did take into account sort of recall and that people would sort of forget perhaps over time?
So I think actually we didn't really include as a sample of the person or the 2 people that expressed that they spent it on food. Often that messaging was heard from, say, the children implementing partners, and they were actually surprised to hear that in the field. So that might be something that they were not really aware of. In regards to the first part about your question, which I'm slowly forgetting. Sorry?
It's a building rapport.
Yeah, building rapport, yeah. So it was something that it took a lot of kind of digging and like, are you sure, what about this? And then being, oh yeah. And that really helped that we had translators who were local to the area. So I think we were able to establish that. It was a little harder to establish, I think, with the household decision making.
We also emphasized that we were students and definitely not a part of the implementing partner because it was sort of assumed that we were coming to it to assess what they were spending on and potentially to take away those cash transfers, but really we just emphasized that we were students and we were in no way a part.
Yeah. So yeah, that's good. Once we pushed that, they were kind of like, okay, well, we have no influence in the program. We don't know those people. Who gave you this?
Completely anonymous.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a question or any other?
Actually, Bill and I are together from A to D about you. Ask them type questions, so they are great minds or whatever. Actually, I'm wondering, when you look at these profiles, and there were also some comments earlier you had noted that some recipients said that they were only supposed to use this cash. Did you get a sense of how the different organizations went about sensitizing the communities, or if they sensitized them prior to the cash distribution?
What do you mean exactly by sensitizing?
Actually, in a very simple sense, meeting with the communities, community level, saying there's a program coming, it's going to have a cash transfer, this is what it means, this is what it doesn't mean,
Sure.
and particularly if women are the primary recipients of, trying to mitigate any potential negative consequences that could come with them being the recipient of cash.
I can speak to this a little bit. When we started noticing this instructions issue, where people were perhaps a little fearful to spend money on anything besides food, we actually started talking to the field staff about it. And there seemed to be a disconnect between the field staff in Monrovia and those who are necessarily in the counties. And the field staff in Monrovia were completely upfront with, we want them to spend their money on things that will enrich their lives, enrich their future, and things that they feel like they need. However, when we had the same discussion with the field staff that were necessarily in the counties and those who were speaking with the villagers, those field staff were a little more upfront with, we instructed them directly that they could only spend it on cash because those were the instructions that we received. because there was very much a disconnect almost in Monrovia itself between the head field staff and those who are in the county.
We kind of shied away from trying to assess the programs as a bit. We really focused on beneficiaries. And so we didn't really focus on like how did each program discussion differ. The whole thing with instructions, it came up naturally, which is why I think it's very interesting to see how, whether the program comes in and gives a very specific, like, let me tell you what's happening. But I think the majority of programs did have like the selection committee for who is eligible was community focused. I think we heard that across the board for the most part.
Right. And there's an expression among the different field staffs that we had as implementing partners that they would really like to get together as like a food security community within Liberia and discuss some of their projects, but apparently that just wasn't happening as it does here in DC. So that's definitely an opportunity for growth.
Yeah, the purpose of our review is to measure their preference on modalities. There's a perception from programs.
Yeah.
So I don't think a lot of you, they said things like, we are so scared to send stuff on the atom.
So would you say then if you were to formulate a recommendation or two for Food for Peace or the implementing partners based on the work that you've done, what might they be? What might the one or two recommendations be coming out of your study?
Well, I'll start a little bit different. I'll suggest a few things to look into. And I think this categories of disbursements. We talked to someone earlier that was saying that they asked people to use beans. I think it was ACB use beans to kind of express how much percentage of your distribution you're using where. And that was really interesting to see how they start to differ. As well as the seeds, one of the main things that FFP wanted us to look at was USAID and FFP felt that they were connecting beneficiaries to higher quality seeds, and that wasn't reciprocated from the beneficiary side. They were saying that the seeds didn't grow very well, and they stated a bunch of reasons that they felt were the case. But to actually go and find out what a more probable reason is, was it because the climate was just hotter last year and that's why crops failed, or was it because the vendors were mixing bad seeds with good seeds? I think that's definitely worth exploring more, because that would be a big issue with the program, is the vouchers not being successful in that sense.
So for the selection of modalities, I would think it would be great to provide different modalities for separate groups. For example, if the handicapped people or more vulnerable households, I would say food is the best option because it will take them a lot of time to walk, and the process is really hard. The weather is hot. But for more food secure families, I would say maybe cash is a better option. And also cash is the most cost efficient modality. So I think, yeah, we should definitely use different groups.
For different categories of people. Interesting.
Okay. My commentary is on the voucher program. On our last few days, we were in Bong assessing ACDI Ebola. And the way that they kind of rolled out their food response program is that they integrated it with a voucher program that was already in country. And it kind of, it really reinforced the assistance that was being given after Ebola, because they were able to not only have the tools and seeds that were coming from Food for Peace, but it was built on top of a program where they had a community farm where they had farmers from all across their village, actually several villages, come to a community farm and share best practices for seeds and plants that were in their area. And that was appropriate for the soil, that was appropriate for sunlight, and like the tools that they already had. In addition, they gave these community farmers tools to assist with this farm, and the funds that were made from this community farm actually went towards development projects. So they felt a sense of pride in the development projects that were potentially coming through the next year because of this funding, which included a school. And then they took these best practices home with to their own homes, and were able to get additional seeds and tools to use at their personal homes. And so everywhere we went, the beneficiaries that we assessed from this program just absolutely loved it, and they felt like it was a long-term solution, and they felt a great sense of pride and independence from it.
The last thing I would say is to look a bit more into the instructions. As the vast majority of beneficiaries spent their money in a variety of categories, and it was a small minority that had kind of expressed that I was scared to spend, concerned about spending the money on other things. And even those that expressed concerns, they often still spent their money on other things, but it's a lot harder to get out of them. But it would be very interesting to see how the program approached distribution and kind of explaining to the community what they were doing. how that affects, how they end up spending their money.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions here in the room? It seems like our online people are not only not present, but silent in terms of questions. So if not, I will thank the Capstone team for a great presentation. So this is recorded, am I right? And we will email a link to all of you online and in this room, so you'll have access to it if you're interested to see it in more detail. And thanks again to the three of you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Everything will also be posted on FSN Network.
All right. Great. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Well done.
Adam, it's been so
It's
great
been a
working with you
pleasure.
guys.